Session recording. This session is a studio recording, so if you have any specific questions, please contact us at tlevelsupport@ncfe.org.uk, or you can speak to your dedicated T-Level account executive, that's Danielle Johnson, Emma King, or Bradley Pierce. So I'm Helen Scanlon, I'm part of NCFE's provider development team. I'm joined in the delivery of the session today by Janet King, the Sector Manager for Education and Childcare. We've been supporting the Education and Childcare T Level providers since early 2020. You can see the objectives of today's session on the screen now, and this session has been produced in response to support requests we've received from our centres. So the plan for this session is to develop your understanding of and confidence in preparing your students for the occupational specialist assignments numbered 1 and 3. We'll not be including assignment 2 today. Support for the observations required in the early years educator and assistant teaching assessments is provided by our colleagues in the quality assurance team. So please contact us for access to the recordings of these sessions if you'd find these helpful. Hello, Janet. Any words of wisdom before we start, please?
Hello, Helen, and hello to everybody who's listening to the webinar. I think what I'd just say is to remind ourselves of where we are. So the students now have done those 12 elements, they've done the core, they've had the breadth, they've had significant depth, and now it's that deeper dive into those occupational specialisms. And these are a real opportunity to bring together theory and practice. And I think you'll probably hear lots of conversation around theory and practice as the webinar develops. Thanks, Helen.
Okay, lovely. We're going to start off by signposting you to our QualHub page with the qualification-specific instructions for delivery, or the QSID. This will help you to identify what you need to have in place for all of the T-level summative assessments. And if you look on the contents page, you'll see where you'll find the detail related to this T-level qualification. We've put the relevant information from this document onto this next slide to give you a one-page overview of each of the assessment components for the early years educator and assisting teaching specialisms. So this first table shows the requirement for the EYE assignments 1 and 3. Both of these assignments are externally set and marked and take place under invigilated conditions at your centres. You might find it useful to pause the recording for a minute to go to the website for this document or make a note of any important information from this slide. And then this page has the same information related to assisting teaching. Again, we've added the link to the document that you need on the screen for you now. So if you want to pause the recording, if you'd like to make any notes or go to that document. As you can see, both assignments are externally set and marked under invigilated conditions. So moving on to a quick overview of the dates for the 2021-22 academic year. For Early Years Educator Assignment 1, it's scheduled for the 27th of April 2022. And EYE Assignment 3 has the window of the 1st of April until the 27th of May 2022. For Assistant Teaching, Assignment 1 is scheduled for the same date as the EYE Assignment 1 on the 27th of April, and Assignment 3 is on the 4th of May at 2022. Okay, we'll now provide a quick overview of the assessment for performance outcomes and marks for these occupational specialism assignments. So we'll start with the Early Years Educator. The performance outcomes are assessed using a synoptic approach, and you can find the detail regarding which outcomes are assessed in which assessment tasks in the EYE tutor guidance, the link to which is also on the screen now. You can also see how the different assignment tasks contribute to the overall grade for the occupational specialism, with 50% being assigned to assignment 2 and assignments 1 and 3 being 25% each. So now for assisting teaching. The performance outcomes are assessed using a synoptic approach, same as EYE. And you also see that the link to the AT tutor guidance document is there on the screen now too. The second table shows how assignment tasks contribute to the overall specialism grade, and this is the same as the EYE, with 50% being assigned to assignment 2 and assignments 1 and 3 being 25% each. So now let's have a look at assignments 1 and 3, starting with the EYE pathway. Any suggestions we make in relation to teaching and learning could easily be applied to both specialisms, so please use them to support your planning where appropriate. We might suggest an activity for EYE, which would also work for AT, but we're not going to repeat them. We want to maximise the use of your time today. Janet, is there anything you'd like to add before we look at the sample tasks in detail?
Thanks, Helen. I think that overview is very useful, and it's also very reassuring, I think, to be reminded of the whole picture of what these assignments are going to look and feel like. So we're going to go and do that kind of individual look at these assignments now. As Helen has said, these can be aligned and allocated to the occupational specialism that your students are working with. So remember that when you look at the teaching hints and tips. But above all, I think my greatest message at this point would be, when you're looking at what the assignment expectations are, remember that preparation for these isn't just happening the week before. The preparation for these can be happening all the way through the qualification. So really good to think at the beginning of the year how you can start to plan and prepare and to develop the skills that the students will need, and to make absolute best use of that valuable placement experience. Thanks, Helen.
Okay, lovely. So for all of the occupational specialism assignments, centres have access to specific tutor guidance, sample preliminary materials, tasks, assignments, and associated mark schemes. So please look on QualHub for these under the Education and Childcare TQ page in the Support Materials section. We're going to start by summarising the assignments. And assignment 1 for the early years pathway focuses on planning educational activities in relation to specific individual needs. Students will be provided with some preliminary material no more than 1 week before the live assessment window opens, and this will inform their research and planning activities. They'll then have a 4-hour supervised session where they'll complete the planning task. So this first slide shows the sample preliminary material, and in this example, the first section explains the scenario and the type of educational activities the students are going to need to prepare. The second piece of information provides more detail regarding the ages of the children and the length of the activities that the students must prepare. And then the final section explains how long they have to prepare and what further information they will be provided with, along with the resources they will have access to during this assessment. And this sample was created before the EYFS update, so future assessments will include the most recent versions. So for teaching tips, we'd recommend using real-life examples to engage your students in discussion about the type of activities which would be most appropriate for a range of children and different areas. So examples here are physical development and literacy. So which others might be included? Researching these, discussing them, and reviewing each other's ideas in a supported environment is going to be useful. And samples for discussion and review, of course, are going to be useful, especially if the examples might not be appropriate, to get the students really thinking deeply and critically about the subject that they're exploring and learning. Teachers could also create activities focused on using these samples effectively, where to look for the relevant information, how to use it to inform planning, etc., etc. So this next slide shows the next task, which is the sample task, follows on from the preliminary material. So the first section of this document repeats the instructions from the preliminary task, and then it goes on to provide further information about the task. This extra information builds on what was provided in the preliminary material by providing the topic for the next 3 weeks. So teaching and learning for this include using the students' initial ideas from the preliminary material to explore how relevant they are in relation to this live task. So a guided discussion or reflection activity could be useful here. And then of course using the bullet points that are shown on the screen now. You can check, the students can check for coverage and matches, and maybe a reflective activity designed to include all of these to develop their ideas and plans further. Teachers could have some samples for the students to review and improve. And of course, have an action plan and tasks for the students to complete at the end to summarise what they've learned from doing this and also develop their skills and knowledge in relation to getting ready for doing the live one. On the screen now, you can see the same information and documents are available for the assignment 1 of the assistant teaching specialism, exactly the same as it was for EYE. And assignment 1 for the AT pathway focuses on another planning activity. Again, students will be provided with preliminary material no more than 1 week before the live assessment window opens, and this should inform their research and planning activities. They'll then have 2.5-hour supervised session where they'll complete the planning task itself. So this next slide shows the sample preliminary material for the AT task. And in this example, this first section provides the instructions for the task, and this is to carry out an investigation and a planning task. The investigation task is unsupervised and it's also not marked. The second piece of information here explains the investigation task, and for teaching tips would recommend using a range of examples to explore, in this case, differentiation and appropriate progress in the different key stages. This example focuses on literacy. What other areas might the focus of such a task be? Students could use the examples provided to review their own skills and knowledge in these areas, and also predict which sources of information could help them to investigate the scenario effectively. So now we have the actual sample task. This example task provides further information about the planning task. It does include the setting in which the activity will be completed in and some detail about the children that are going to be in this group. The instructions ask the student to use the lesson plan template and includes detail regarding the needs of the children and how those needs should be used in the planning. And the final section here explains how the students must also explain how they would manage the learning environment, plan the next steps for the children, and feed back their work and activities to the class teacher. So for teaching tips on this task, the students could be asked to review the extra information and if they could have or did predict what was included in it by the content of the preliminary task. A discussion activity related to this detail could be useful, and also a comparison and prediction of what else might have been relevant to this scenario. Obviously, using the lesson template in their preparation activities is going to help them to develop their skills, understanding and confidence. And they might also bring in examples from their placement to explore any similarities, differences and/or lessons learned. This third section here is all about how to use things in the practice. We all know that sometimes the learning environment is not ideal, so this could be a really useful area to explore. Students could share their placement experiences, identify how hurdles can be overcome and what strategies they could use to minimise the disruption and maximise the effectiveness of the children's learning experiences. Next step planning will also be an area which teachers could explore in depth with the students and providing feedback to the class teacher, ensuring that the content is relevant and useful. You could also cover those and evaluate those in your teaching and learning classroom activities. So the next 3 slides do show the lesson plan template that the students are going to be using for this task. So the content of this form provides much more detail, which should be used to inform the students' activity planning. Again, discussion of what's there and how the detail impacts on the work of the teaching assistant will be useful. So this will inform what the student includes here and shown on the screen now. Making clear links to the teacher's plan. Discussion related to their industry placement experience would be useful to share. And again, completed plans for review and analysis will consolidate learning and build the students' confidence. You might want to pause the recording here and on the next couple of pages if you'd like to read what's in the plan in more detail. So all the advice from the previous slide also applies to this second page of the sample lesson plan. The focus on how they could differentiate the teacher's activities here would be useful, with an evaluation of the type of issues the children might have when changing the modal verbs. Students could also discuss their knowledge of and confidence level related to the topic and identify how they might develop those areas if they need to. They could also plan extra activities to support the children to complete this next activity. It might be that they could create resources or activities which scaffold the learning. For example, having cards with modal verbs on to move around. And classroom or homework activities that you set for them could be based on how a kinesthetic activity could support the children's completion of such a task. And then this final lesson plan example page includes extension activity task ideas and a plenary. And there's a section for the evaluation of the session here, so practicing this is also going to be useful. It's a high-level skill evaluating the success of classroom activities, so students might need to be supported to do this in an objective, constructive, realistic and professional manner. You'll already be developing the reflective skills in all aspects of that T Level programme, so highlighting and developing this should be evident in the majority of your teaching and learning activities. And discussing these experiences and peer learning is also going to be really useful here. Okay, so we're at the end of assignment 1, but before we move on to assignment 3, I'm just going to check in with Janet for any other subject specialist content or ideas that I've missed.
Thanks, Helen. I really don't think you've missed anything at all. But what I will do is sort of summarize some of the things that you've talked about and just again emphasize the link between theory and practice. So occupational specialisms are so called because they bring together that coherence of theory and practice. Preparation for assessment is critical for student confidence, and discussions around those experiences from placement that are integral to the features of assessments from the occupational specialisms. For example, assignment 1 focuses on planning. So, we would really recommend discussions around how experiences are planned within the setting. Also using scenario-based learning opportunities as well to promote those skills that students will need for assessment. Having the knowledge and experiencing a range of planning situations is crucial, of course, but feeling that confidence, actually feeling ready to tackle an assessment and the assessment requirements involved and how to showcase the knowledge and skills can really help students during that preparation stage. The more familiar we are, we all know, the more familiar we feel, and then, the more confident we will be as we approach those assessment requirements, and the less pressured we will also arguably feel too. Thanks,
Lovely,
Helen.
thanks. That's great, Janet. I'm going to hand back to you now for this next section.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to take a look at assignment 3 and we'll start with the early years educator. But as you can see on this slide here, we've got a broad range that's taking us through the whole of assignment 3. So we're going to take it bit by bit, but we can see on here that we've got part 1A, we've got part 1B, and we've got a part 2 as well. So we'll look at all these different elements, well, I shouldn't say elements, that might confuse you with the core. We're going to look at how these, the early years educator assignment 3 actually brings together that learning from the performance outcomes as well, and the sort of preparations involved. So let's start with 1A. Okay, so what is 1A all about? So, and we'll follow this on the screen, but you must carry out 3 observations on one child. These are the instructions to the student. Carry out 3 observations on one child in your industry placement. So off they go to placement. They're doing 3 observations on a child within a specified assessment window. Observing the child in activities that support a specific area of learning within that early years foundation stage framework. Now I've highlighted on there, we've highlighted expressive arts and design because the sample paper is actually asking the students to think about a particular area, have a particular area of learning in mind. The reason that it's been bolded is because that will change. Okay, so it's really important that the practice is around all those 7 areas of learning and development, and not just linking to the one in the sample paper. So what are the students doing? They're carrying out 3 observations, and one may be a narrative, one a post-it note type of method, and one a time sample. And again, these have been made bold on here in these bullet points because those observation methods will change. And so it's important that during that practice, during the preparation for assignment 3, 1A, students are using a range of different methods to gather observation data. Really important to feel confident so that they're not going to be thrown by these different types and different methods. And they'll use an observation booklet that we provide. So the students will write these 3 observations in any order, but they'll be writing those observations in a given time, and then those booklets will be returned to the provider, but it can be done so via the placement supervisor. And it's really important that that observation booklet is back with the provider in time to do the next part of assignment 3. So let's take a look at that. Now, students will have done those 3 observations. So what do they have to do next with their observations? It's really important that the emphasis in this second part, in part 1B, 2A and 2B, is really around the confidence that students have in those methods. It's all about their own strengths and weaknesses. Evaluate the strengths and weaknesses of your own practice. Suggest ways that you could engage with continuing professional development to improve your observational practice and skills. Now, the students will have 1 hour to do this. So it's quite significant because an hour is a long time when you think about what's being expected here. So what sorts of things can we do to prepare? Let's have a look. So the teaching tips that you could do, and again, practice, practice, practice with observations to feel confident using that range of different methods. And we know that in early years settings, observations may take many different forms. However, being able to develop those observational skills really does require a lot of practice. And these methods of long observations, if you like, will really help the students to tune into that. So, teaching tips. Consider the range of assessment methods from the specification. Make sure you're covering all of those and practicing those. Discuss strengths and weaknesses of each observation method. What might be really useful for a certain type of observation? What might be less useful? And why? Are there any limits to this particular method? What are they? And then the student can begin to reflect. They can use sample observations from a range of methods and reflect on their own knowledge. When they're thinking about CPD, well, what is CPD? Why is it important? And significantly, how this can improve their own skills when they're observing young children. So let's just recap. They're going into their placement, they've got a booklet, the students are doing 3 observations, they'll be told what methods to use, and they'll be looking at one child, and they'll be given an area of the EYFS. So obvious practice opportunities there, and make sure the practice opportunities use the range of observation methods that are in that specification. That's the best possible preparation that you can have. And then sharing those observations with their peers. What was awkward about doing that observation? Oh, I hated doing the checklist. Why did you hate that? What are the limits to that? What extra knowledge do you think you would need to be able to use that method or actually is the CPD around knowing these different methods really well and being able to apply them appropriately. So, what next? In this next part, the students are given 3 observations. So they've written some observations, they've looked at the methods, and they've thought about those different observation methods in terms of strengths, weaknesses, and their own CPD in terms of observational skills. And now they are doing what we automatically think one would do with observations, and they're beginning to evaluate them. So they will be given an insert. And in the example, we're looking at a young boy called George, and we're looking at 3 observations. So analyze each of the methods to draw conclusions about whether George is meeting the expected milestones in his mathematical development in relation to the current requirements of the early education curriculum. Very important now that we start to think about this. Use your analysis of the observations to discuss the next steps for George's mathematical development, giving examples of suitable activities or opportunities to support your answer, to support the students in their response. I think what's important here is to remember that that insert that you're given from NCFE, from us, will actually set the scene for these 3 observations. So there'll be a little bit of a brief as to what's going on and what the area is that this particular child will have the observations based on, for example. Use your analysis of the observations to discuss next steps. So it's not going to be George necessarily, of course. It's not going to be mathematics necessarily, of course. So remember, there's hints and tips here all the way through in terms of, changing those scenarios. Students are going to be practicing their own observations. So it makes sense for them to start analysing and evaluating that data in their preparation for this next step in assignment 3. Give examples of suitable educational activities or opportunities. Think about those next steps. Students need to start thinking about the different types of activities and experiences and strategies that are going on in their placement when that particular area of development is being used and is being maximised. It really does pay to practice and practice and practice with observations. We all know that. But the more students can bring in their ideas, maybe analysing and evaluating together with their peers would be really, really useful. Practice evaluation. Use the EYFS and supporting guidance to support that analysis, and consider ways to plan for next steps and the factors involved. Really thinking about the individual children here, and thinking about are there any particular needs that are within this insert, any particular needs coming out of that observation. How do we involve other people within that next steps planning, and why is that important? So lots of rich sort of information that you can pull into this. Okay, so that is what's happening with assignment 3 in the early years. And as you can see, assignment 1 was focusing very much on planning. Assignment 3 is picking that up in that cycle and is very much around that observation. Now let's change our attention to assisting teaching. And assisting teaching is slightly different, but has some similarities as well. So what do I mean by that? Because that doesn't make sense, does it? What I mean is that we are looking at the skills of observation, but we're using them in a different way. We're using them to be able to apply those skills to an analysis and an evaluation of case studies. And you'll be given, there's 2 case studies in this particular example, and that's what you will find when you do the live papers. And some of the case study will involve some information, some insert to help you. So I'm going to read through these next few slides to help to contextualize. So we've got a case study one here that's all around safeguarding and well-being. And this is what the students will be asked to do. Discuss how you would respond to a situation in your role as a teaching assistant. In your response, you should refer to all relevant aspects of the teaching assistant role. In particular, identify safeguarding concerns that you may have and explain the reasons for your concerns. Explain and justify actions that you must take to support safety and well-being. Identify environmental factors in this child's life, in this young person's life, that may be affecting his or her, and analyse how these factors may be contributing to changes in behaviour. Describe strategies, activities, types of resources, any adaptations to activities and resources that you could use, that the student could use to meet the learning and the pastoral well-being needs, and justify your reasons. Consider ways in which you might work with the teacher to support learning. Now, let's just stay on this slide for a minute, because these are the questions in the sample paper that are being applied to a particular situation. And this in the sample paper is looking at changes in a young person's behaviour. And that could be very much concerned with changes in personality, changes in learning, and so on. Think of as many case studies as you can, scenarios, role play situations. When you're delivering safeguarding and well-being, you know, think back to what you did in the core. Look at the performance outcome and dig deeper and use the information in that performance outcome that's around the safeguarding to actually explore different situations. And if we break this down, what is it actually asking us to know? What is it actually asking your student to be aware of? It's asking your student to know, what do we understand by safeguarding? What can you see, therefore, that identifies the safeguarding concerns in that scenario? So the student needs to know, what do we understand by safeguarding? Why do you think that's a safeguarding concern? What would you do to support the safety and well-being? What's the policies involved here? What's the procedures involved here? Who do you need to speak to? Why would you need to speak to them? All of these things are coming in regardless of the scenario. Is the scenario saying that there's changes in the behavior of this young person? What are they? Start by identifying them. And what hints and tips are within that scenario that might suggest something might be going on that's affecting this child, you know, in his immediate sort of environmental experiences and factors there. So it's asking you about that. Really important. Remember, it's asking you discuss how you might actually work with others. So think about that. Think about as many opportunities that you can have where you can apply knowledge of safeguarding and those key things. What is safeguarding? Why is it important? Who's involved? You need to set the scene for safeguarding and well-being, and then you need to apply that to what you see in the case study. And as much practice that you can on that, then the better. Now, the second case study is around learning and development. Discuss, so you've got your case study, read the case study and the practitioner observations in the insert. So you're given, in this particular case study, you're given some information. And this case study is around a child who's transitioning into primary school and who's finding it very difficult. So but perhaps a typical sort of experience, certainly one that most children will go through, and this young child is really struggling in that transition. So you know, we can set the scene there. So these sorts of things during that, what's it asking about? It's asking about transition. It's asking about how can those significant events impact on the child's holistic learning, on their holistic development. In your response, the student should refer to all relevant aspects of the teaching assistant role. Discuss and explain the possible contributing reasons for the child's behaviour, taking into account his or her age and stage of development. So lots of knowledge coming out of that. We're thinking about what's going on. We obviously want to know about transition here in this particular example. We're thinking about how that might impact on a child's holistic health and well-being and therefore present itself through behaviour. What about age and stage of development? Is there anything in that scenario that suggests that this might be more difficult for this child? Why? What about justifying what you might do to support that child? Why would you do that? Why do you think that's a good idea? Thinking about inclusive practice, meeting individual needs. All sorts of things that you can apply to a variety of different situations and scenarios. It also wants the students to be aware of partnership working. This is coming out. Remember those performance outcomes. There are 4 performance outcomes in assisting teaching. There are 5 in the early years educator. These assignments are based on those 5 performance outcomes. So use as much from that as in preparation as you can. Looking at parents, working with other professionals, analysing the benefits of working with others. And then it's asking us to evaluate a range of activities and resources, including adaptations to activities and resources that might support this child, depending on those circumstances that have been shown in the case study. I've deliberately not shown you the case study because it's going to be different every time, but the questions will be similar to this because they're investigating those performance outcomes. So really important, evaluate a range of activities, identifying them. Why have you chosen those? What difference do you think those activities are going to make to help this child or a young person in this particular circumstance? So the teaching and learning tips for me: use case studies to support discussions. Every time you're looking at your classroom activities, when you're doing performance outcomes, whether that's for assignment 1, assignment 3, when you're into those occupational specialisms, use as many case studies as you can to provoke questions, to provoke understanding, and to support peer-on-peer discussions. Evaluate those case studies. What's going on in these case studies? What difference is it making when we suggest doing the things we do? Develop confidence in identifying those key features, summarizing the situation. What's going on in this case study? Evaluate the impact to holistic development. How is what's going on impacting that child or young person? How is it going to make them feel? Therefore, how might it affect the way that child or young person behaves, presents themselves? Are there any implications with age and stage here? Are there any short or long-term impact that we need to be aware of? And what about those intervention strategies, activities, experiences, differentiation, parental and professional partnership collaboration, and what difference will that make? Evaluation, deep and sort of really meaningful approach. Implications for practice. Does the student or can the student, is there opportunity to talk about different resources that may be used and policy and procedure? So these things can all be captured in case study and application of knowledge from those performance outcomes. Thank you, Helen.
Lovely, thanks for that, Jan. You made a lot of points there in relation to assignment 3 that can absolutely be applied to assignment 1, so thanks for that. So we're going to finish off today's session by posing a question just for you to take away to consider. You can see it on the slide now. Assessment activities do test competencies and the ability to apply the knowledge gained to the practice. This list we've got on the screen now isn't exhaustive, but it could inform what you teach in the coming weeks to ensure that your students are fully prepared. We've provided some ideas related to how you could do this in today's recording. Which of them could you use? How could you adapt them and use them? And how will you use them will be dictated by the individual needs and preferences of the teaching staff and the students. So we'd also encourage you to fully involve your students in the process of deciding exactly what you do and how you do it, whilst building their awareness of their development needs. And that's going to engage them in actually developing them. So applying all of those skills and knowledge from both the core and the occupational specialism input to the practice in the scenarios in a holistic way is what the students will be doing for these occupational specialism assignments. Janet, is there anything else you'd like to add at all?
I think what I'd just say is to remember that the occupational specialisms will really be enriched. Those assessments and the approach to those assessments will be really enriched if students are able to see the benefits of their placement experience and bring together the richness of that learning, helping them to make sense and contextualize every day they go into placement. That those are living and breathing case studies, and they need to be encouraged to bring back some of those reflections and begin to think about some of the way that they can begin to evaluate, discuss, and learn from each other in terms of those placement experiences. It really is the best preparation for the assessments for the occupational specialisms. Thanks, Helen.
Lovely, thank you. So thanks for that, Janet, you're a superstar. We've reached the end of today's session, and so we'd like to say many thanks for you to taking the time out to access this recording. We'd like to say take care, goodbye, but also please let us know of any further support or development needs you have in relation to teaching the T-level technical qualifications. Thank you and goodbye.